It is said that when the chapel was about to be built on Croagh Patrick, the clergy who were in Westport decided to build it in Marisk to make the pilgrimage easier. When the men were cleaning the foundation, a bell was heard ringing every evening. The sound came from the top of Croagh Patrick, so they ceased building the chapel there and built it at the top of the Reek. In County Mayo, a mountain overlooks the sea. Croagh Patrick. The beliefs, myths, and stories centered around this mountain are vast as its own massiveness and as varied as the stones shattered across its peak. 764 meters above Clew Bay, home to an alleged 365 islands, one for each day of the year, sits the humble oratory, nested among the flaking quartzite and serpentinite rocks. Its concrete manufacturedness is rather out of place on the severe natural landscape, its foundation dug into the Silurian bones of the mountain, a meeting of deep past and human present. How did it come to be? And why did it come to be? By understanding the historical relationships between the practitioners of Irish Catholicism, their pre-Christian ancestors, and the Catholic Church as controlled by Rome, we can come to see the unassuming chapel as a symbol of Catholic appropriation of the Irish pattern, and the words read at the start of this piece as propaganda as recorded by the youth of Ireland under the Church's approving eye. It would be folly to plunge into the body of our story without first identifying the man who gave the mountain its name, and for many of the acts done on the mountain since his alleged visit some 600 or so years ago. Patrick wrote of himself as translated by the Reverend George Thomas Stokes and Reverend Charles H. Wright in 1887. Born in Banavem, Tabernet, which was either Scotland or France in the 4th century. At 16, he was enslaved to Ireland, where he found his purpose in Christianity. A divine message foretold him of his escape to a boat, and after this escape, he began his mission to convert the masses to the word of the Christian God. He traveled much and returned in time to Britain, though again was taken as a captive. A divine message told him of his freedom once more, and after 2 months this came to pass, and he returned to Britain again. This was when he was called back to Ireland, but dithered on whether to go, not wanting to leave after all his time unwillingly spent away. But upon his return to the land he once spent so long as a slave in, he converted the island of Ireland in the name of his Christian God. His account did not detail his mythic deeds on Croagh Patrick, but later accounts record his 40 days fast, and of his throwing down of demons or giants, and of his driving the snakes out of Ireland into a nearby lake or the sea by the mountain. Though scholarly texts from the 19th century call into question the legitimacy of the tales, in the St. Patrick Myth, published in the October 1883 volume of the North American Review, author Moncure D. Conway compares the tale of St. Patrick to tales out of ancient Egypt. He states that, quote, "The Celtic story of the extermination of snakes from Ireland has so defied all efforts to Catholicize it that it has been tabooed. Yet the myth persists despite his condemnation that, quote, "I don't think there is an educated Catholic in Ireland who believes a syllable of the story. In contemporary times, as we will see time and again, the Church has now embraced these strange Irish tales as their own." At the end of July, swarms of people, at one time as many as 65,000, flock up the mountain to participate in a ritual they call Reek Sunday. This modern iteration dates to 1903. Instigated by a local parish priest in Newport, Michael MacDonald, and Archbishop of Tuam, John Healy. Outdoor expressions of faith, as this were once called, patterns, a uniquely Irish expression of Catholicism as it was wound together with pre-Christian rituals of pagan worship, a term which is a corruption of the word patron, denoting the celebration's dedication to the saint associated with the place and date. These practices had been condemned by those who used these rituals of devout worship and communal merrymaking as evidence to support the stereotype of Irish primitiveness, unholiness, and simplicity, namely the occupying colonial forces of Britain. This caused the clergy themselves to look upon the patterns as troublesome acts, and would in time be categorized as unholy or sacrilegious altogether. Public opinions from the early 19th century church damned the folk as partaking in celebrations of the orgies of Bacchus rather than the memory of a pious saint. A quote from the writings of the rector of St. Peter's in Athlone in 1819. A colleague out of County Kilkenny supplemented further, comparing these patterns to the, quote, orgies of the Prince of Darkness. While the Church condemned the practice, the traditions remained irrepressible, but with the modern world coming into being, attendance did begin to decline. The famine had a severe impact on the number of attendants, considering the population loss of the island throughout the atrocity and migration. It is unsurprising fewer people participated. The elderly, who would have carried and passed on the traditions, would not have been spared with any favor. And morale would have also been justifiably quite dulled from the mass trauma of the decimation of the country's population. It is perhaps surprising then that clergy were still preoccupied with the seemingly interminable practices well into the 20th century. The pilgrimage up Croagh Patrick to venerate the saint was, of course, itself a target of these direct actions against pattern ritual. In the last 2 decades of the 19th century, Archbishop of Tuam, Dr. John McEvilley, determined the acts of devotion should take place in the more respectable setting of a church and not on a mountaintop. And so it was that the unruly and unsightly act of outdoor devotion dwindled until 1903, when parish priest MacDonald and Archbishop Healy pled their case to the Catholic Church to reverse their judgment and condemnation of the practice of outdoor veneration. The Church did just that. By endorsing these traditions, the Catholic Church aligned itself with the vision of a new Ireland, free from the grasp of Britain's near millennia-long colonial tyranny. And in 1905, they completed their permanent and physical claim paradise, of which they had so long condemned. This took the shape of a small, unassuming mountaintop chapel. Pilgrims arrived by the trainful thanks to the clever partnership of the train lines around the country and the Archbishop. Business boomed for both parties. People starved of religious fulfillment, community ritual, and novel experience emptied their pockets right into the open vaults of the train executives. The dedication of the chapel saw 25,000 individuals make the trip on the 31st of July in 1905, ensuring that the Archbishop was not only immortalized in the eyes of the people, but also raised his image in the church hierarchy. To this day, tens of thousands still ascend on Reek Sunday, but pilgrimages are made the year round. Undertaking the pilgrimage demonstrates that whatever the motivations, one finds a solace, a meaning, a natural epiphany when immersed in the practice. Looking up the mountain, a deep divot in the land has been carved by the feet of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, over the millennia. A physical scar carved by the spiritual pull of the mountain's peak. The experience of a pilgrim hasn't much changed over the last century. You are at the whim of the weather, one with the land as much as the sheep, stone, and heather. From an article published in the Freeman's Journal on Saturday the 22nd of July, 1916, the author writes, quote, "This pilgrimage to the Holy Mountain, there just as much as the Holy Mountain itself, and in the summer evenings, its lovely livery of gold and purple and crimson." He goes on to say, "For the people have come to know and live it well, as enshrining for them, and the children's children unto the latest day, the loveliest and tenderest and most sacred traditions of the Irish race." Lawrence Brannock added to the sentiment on Saturday the 19th of August 1933 in the Connaught Telegraph. "After an absence of 20 years, we climbed the Reek again, and wondered if it would still hold us in that magic spell which it did before." He finishes the piece by saying, after reflecting much on his travels in the intervening 2 decades, quote, "But none of these gave us such a thrill as the dawn of the day on Ireland's holy mountain." On the 30th of July, 1955, Un Mangir Suga wrote in the Limerick Leader, "Indeed, here on the slope of Croagh Patrick, one got the strange feeling that everything, including the pilgrims who toiled upward through the night, had become in some way far removed from the ordinary, everyday world." All these stories, and the thousands or millions more like them, have been watched over by the little whitewashed walls of the chapel, whose face greets each pilgrim through the mist. A reminder that the church establishment would take credit for that individual's journey, and therefore the redemption of their soul. But it is just the opposite. The life is breathed into these practices by the individual practitioners. Whatever their motivation, it is them that keep the spirituality of place alive and inspire future generations to do the same. A poem by J. Cryan of Newry, published in 1912, dedicated to the pilgrims, reads, "Lambent the light as the night clouds are drawn, muffled the murmur of waves from the sea, mists on the mountain at breaking of dawn, crowds who are climbing the pathway with me, sunrise that softly illumines the scene, mountain and moorland and isle-studded bay. Faith is that flash with the faith that has been, graven and guarded since Patrick's day. Midday and mystical spell of the west, thousands are thronging by faith's fervors led, pilgrims who pray by the cross on their crest, shrine of the saint on whose footsteps we tread, sunset and splendor of sea wave and hill, hue of the heather and sheen of the bay, glory of God in the bosoms that will mirror the memory of this blessed day."